want Republicans dead.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
So, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to the Enemies List podcast. I'm your host, Rick Wilson. My guest today is Meredith McGraw. You have read Meredith's excellent political reporting in Politico, where she is a national political correspondent for them. She is one of these people who has been a student of the Trump era and has a tremendous new book out called Trump in Exile. And I wanted to talk to her today because she's gone deep behind the walls of Mar-a-Lago, basically, to start doing some reporting about where Trump has been in this period between January 6, 2021 and the campaign as it is today. So Meredith, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it. Tell us about Trump in Exile, how you decided to write this, and what your approach has been to reporting out sort of what I jokingly call the man in the high castle.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. You know, I covered Trump first for ABC News when I was a White House reporter and producer for them. And then I joined Politico, reported on the White House, the Trump White House. And then, you know, afterwards, I thought I would cover the Biden White House. But Trump being Trump, there still was so much interest in what his next act could be. And so I really became one of the few reporters that was covering him full time from when he got down to Palm Beach, you know, until he made his announcement and got into the 2024 race. And, you know, Trump is not exactly an unexamined person or, you know, character in American politics. And yet thinking back on this moment in time, I think it really illustrates you know, I think looking at this moment in time, I'll say, really helps you understand how we got here, how Trump now has the Republican nomination, and how we went from a man who was really cast out of Washington when he left on January 20th to someone who dominated the Republican Party in a lot of ways over many months. There were a lot of doubts about whether or not he could end up getting the nomination. I remember when I first started writing on the book, or when I first started reporting the book, there were, you know, he was floundering. His campaign had just taken off, and he was having dinner with Kanye West and Nick Fuentes, promoting NFTs and like talking about, you know, getting rid of the Constitution. And there were people even in his own inner circle that were like, oh gosh, what did I sign up for with this campaign? So it hasn't always been for certain that he could do this. So yeah, Trump in Exile. It's about that time period, and I think will help people understand just what he was up to and why we were at this moment now.
So I want to get your opinion on this. I've always thought that when Trump got to Mar-a-Lago, the one thing that I think reset his fortunes in a weird way was that visit from Kevin McCarthy, where McCarthy went down there and did the thumbs up with Donald Trump, and it sent a ripple. I remember a lobbyist friend of mine who had been still a friend of mine who did not like Trump, bent the knee, did all the usual Washington, D.C. act of, you know, kissing ass and, you know, protecting their clients, all the blah, blah. And he sent me a note and he goes, I thought we were done with this stuff. He goes, and now Kevin's gone down there, and now what do I tell my people? And I didn't have an answer for him. I can't explain Kevin McCarthy's behavior either. But was that really in your mind one of those inflection points? I mean, were there others that I'm not thinking about?
That definitely was. And Kevin McCarthy, if you think back to January 6th, was one of the people literally sounding the alarms, calling Trump. He had been critical of him. And after Trump got down to Palm Beach, somebody from Trump's team reached out to him, and he was going to be down there for a fundraiser at Wilbur Ross's house in Palm Beach. And so they asked him if he would come by, have lunch with Trump. And when he arrived, I write in the book, Trump wanted to take a photograph right away, and there wasn't somebody like an official photographer, so they used McCarthy's phone to take the photo. And then they went back into this little wood paneled bar in Mar-a-Lago where there's that famous portrait of Trump in his tennis tights, right? And so they had lunch in there, and from my reporting, Trump was apparently trying to lose some of his White House weight. And so they had ordered hamburgers, but Trump was like being particular about his food so he could like cut some calories. And, they talked about the midterms. They talked about, if Trump would be supportive moving forward. And then afterwards, they took a photo, Kevin McCarthy with those two thumbs up, and Trump's team did not give McCarthy or his people any heads up that they were going to be sending out that statement that really sent shockwaves. And it sent such a message, though, back to DC. And what you were talking about with your lobbyist friend, it sent such a message back to DC that no, Trump isn't going away. And in fact, he is going to be playing a role moving forward as they try to win back the House.
It interests me that for all of the overhead that was weighing on Trump when he got to Mar-a-Lago, you had the January 6th attack. You had the sort of shock of the loss for him. I had this sense from somebody who is in his not inner circle, but one of these people he gets on the phone with periodically and talks to. And the sense was like, he's like, the guy's just lonely now. He's lonely. He's here. And it's like, he's wandering around the ballroom and the dining room of the club, like looking for any shred of like the old magic. I feel like he recaptured it once he recaptured the party, like control of the party. How long was that window where he was truly adrift at Mar-a-Lago when he got down there?
Well, those first few months really were a weird and lonely time for him. I mean, you have to think back too, we were still in the midst of COVID. And so Mar-a-Lago itself could close down at one point because of COVID. And, there were like still obviously serious concerns about milling about. I mean, it was Florida too, where it was, a different culture. But still, and Trump had some of his longtime political advisors that would pop in and out, but they weren't down in Florida all the time. They were also trying to build up their own client list and, start, bringing, getting clients and thinking about the next elections is like a political consultant does, right? It's your business. And so he really was adrift at that time. He wasn't on Twitter. He wasn't on Facebook. But I have some reporting in there about how he was already talking about building Truth Social during this time period. And some of his aides were setting up dinners and lunches where he could reconnect with people. And a really important dinner that he ended up having was, of course, with Susie Wiles in February of 2021. And that was one of those dinners that, set in motion her coming on board, working for him, trying to reorganize his political structure down there. And, now she's running his presidential campaign, and she has from the get-go. And, he was doing sort of the normal Trump things. He was playing golf, he was calling up people. There were still meetings going on. And I think another big moment for him too was when he went to CPAC. It was his first big speech. And there were nerves about how he was going to be received, even at CPAC. And what became abundantly clear, and CPAC has really evolved over the years to become sort of a Trump MAGA fest now, but it really hammered home for him that, okay, like I still have this core group of people who are going to be with me.
This is a sort of it's been an imponderable for me in some ways for a while. As he's coming out of this, as he realizes, like, gets the CPAC vibe back and starts to understand that there are ways for him to start monetizing his list again and start to, reassert that dominance inside the party. The team that had been around him initially was a different team than a Susie Wiles or a Chris LaCivita.
Mm-hmm.
Those people, the Brad Parscales, Corey Lewandowski's, even Kellyanne Conway's were not people in the center of the Republican apparatus. So what I wanted to talk about was Susie for a moment, because I've known her from Florida for decades, and when she was sort of unceremoniously thrown out of DeSantis' world, that changed her chemistry and her destiny with Trump. And I'm curious, like, the people that were smart, like Susie, that were around him, they recognized DeSantis was sort of a rising star and may have been able to fill a separate lane inside the machine, like Trump without the deficits. How did they respond to him? What was their take on him and their strategy toward him during that period?
Yeah. Well, I do go into this a lot in the book, in particular, Trump's early takedown of DeSantis before he even got in the race in 2024. I get my timing wrong. That was 2023. Okay. He got in the race. But was interesting in talking to Trump's advisors and people who were around him was a lot of them had worked for DeSantis. They knew him from Florida politics, or their past careers, if you will, and they were acutely aware of some of the weaknesses that he had, and they saw him as a beatable candidate, I think, before the public got around to understanding or seeing some of DeSantis's weaknesses too.
I think that's exactly what I sort of like read the room as, that this was a guy they recognized that he was, while he had on paper a lot of the attributes that the corporate world wanted, the sort of meritocracy, voodoo, I think they always understood, right, that he was never going to get the base, was never going to be the same. He was perfectly fine as a ally of Trump, or as an ally of the right, or as an ally of the MAGA thing. But the minute he crossed that line, it was absolutely going to be, all the knives were going to come out for Ron DeSantis, with Susie bearing one of the biggest knives of all.
Right. And, they knew, like you said, he had this tailor-made resume to run for president, but he lacked that sort of charisma and star power. And he didn't have a very loyal team. He at all. He was known for, going through people who worked for him. And so, yeah, they were very well aware of his liabilities, even if he was like sort of the dream candidate for a lot of people who are looking to move on from Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I know I talked to some big Republican donors as DeSantis was rising, and he was getting a lot of those people on board, and their sense of relief was so palpable. It was so like, finally, a normal guy. We could, and yet, I mean, that delusion really speaks, I think, to the division inside the party.
Mm-hmm.
That the base of the Republican Party is really it was always different from the money class, but now they're like two separate universes.
Mm-hmm.
So when Trump went back into the space of being a candidate, of declaring his candidacy, but he still ran a pure, I guess, hibiscus garden strategy out of Mar-a-Lago rather than a rose garden strategy. He really wasn't out there campaigning against Haley and DeSantis and the rest in a traditional way. When did he know he had it in the bag?
Well, it certainly wasn't right after he announced. I mean,
Right.
You think back to the midterm results and when he announced, and it seemed like all of conservative media was doubting him, was lining up sort of against him. His announcement, he didn't have any major lawmakers there or allies in the room for him at all.
Right.
Fox News, the Wall Street Journal editorial board, all the usual suspects were praising Ron DeSantis and his win and casting doubt over Trump. He really stumbled in the months afterwards. And then in January, he started doing, I think, some pretty savvy things. I think the East Palestine visit in early 2023, I was one of the reporters that traveled with him on his first campaign trip on Trump Force One to New Hampshire and to South Carolina, and he lined up some big endorsements there, whether it was the governor or just getting some big state lawmaker names lined up early on and locking down a lot of those endorsements early on and taking that seriously. But Trump and his team really worked hard to chop the legs off of the DeSantis campaign early on with Trump's attacks, which a lot of people were like, what are you doing? Like, why are you setting out to destroy this guy? And Trump recognized he was somewhat of a threat, but the Putting Fingers ad campaign that MAGA Inc. did was disgusting, but also really savvy. And there was one advisor who I interviewed for the book who was talking about Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. And he brought up rule number 5 about ridicule being such a potent force. Potent weapon. And, that's how they viewed it. They knew that if they pushed and prodded at some of these weaknesses with DeSantis early on, that Trump was going to beat Haley, that he was going to beat everybody else in the field, but it was really just DeSantis. And there is a scene in the book too, in Thanksgiving, right after Trump had that disastrous dinner with Kanye West and Nick Fuentes. The people involved with the Super PAC, MAGA Inc., had a meeting, and they described it as like a grim meeting because they were like looking at the numbers and saw that DeSantis did pose a threat, but then they really started to craft out what their strategy would be with him, and that was an important early moment.
So Meredith, one of the things that Donald Trump has had in the as a sort of cloud hanging over him this entire period is that he's had a lot of legal jeopardy. Now, I know he's had a lot of very good breaks in the legal cases. Talk to me a little bit about what your reporting revealed about Trump's mood and attitude and beliefs about the legal cases, because I'm very curious, like how that infected him sort of internally.
Yeah. Well, the search of Mar-a-Lago by the FBI really took them by surprise. Um, and there'd been sort of conflicting thoughts within Trump's inner circle and his own lawyers about how they should handle this, handle, the request from the National Archives. And Trump was getting conflicting information too about, should he push back, which he did,
Right.
or should he cooperate? And there were people around him who understood what a risk that was for him. And it was just, they were constantly getting hammered left and right by his legal problems. And, Trump was listening to people like Boris Epstein and like, Mark Fitton and, people like that who were really pushing him to fight back. And I do look back on some interviews and conversations I had they're in the book, but people complaining who worked for him about having to like push around all of these boxes of documents in
Right.
early 2021. I mean, it was such a mess then, and it's sort of like, you think, and Trump would, say that he would get around to going through the boxes eventually and stuff, but you think back on it, and it seems like, at least with the classified documents case, so much of it could have been avoided. And one of Trump's lawyers described it to me as, once they started demanding things, then, Trump was like, no, they're mine. I'm keeping them. So that's sort of the attitude.
I'm fascinated by how that that case could have been easily avoided.
Mm-hmm.
Just cooperate, just do what everybody else has to do. Is it just his cupidity? Is it just that this guy just can't? Is it some sort of weird like oppositional defiant disorder or something about him that he just couldn't make himself, do the legal thing?
Well, I think it was, in that case, a combination of things. He, hadn't gone through all of these boxes that were filled with random knickknacks and classified documents and all sorts of things from his time in the White House. And partly
Right.
because when he left, it was such a chaotic mess and there weren't a lot of people helping him, pack things up. And the moving out process was in total disarray.
Right.
And, then it's like what that lawyer was saying, once Trump was told, you have to give this back, then he became like obstinate with it. Like, these are mine and I have every right to have them. And then there's this part too, where it's like, you just think about who he is.
Yep.
Forever, he likes to be surrounded by his magazines and his papers. And, you think back to his office in Trump Tower, and it was full of stacks of papers and documents and clips. And this is just sort of how he lives. And he likes mementos. He would hold up Kim Jong-un letters to anybody who came into the Oval Office to show them up. So he had some of these things that were sort of like trophies or relics of this time when he was in the White House. And he obviously wasn't thinking about it as like, oh, I need to be careful.
Return the classified materials.
Yes, exactly. That these are my mementos.
I find it fascinating that so many of these cases where either just doing the right thing once or issuing an apology or doing there's something so, and I've done my anthropology of Trump in a couple of books, and the stubbornness about his ego and the delicacy of that ego. It's always been like his superpower on the one hand and his
Mm-hmm.
kryptonite on the other. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where you close out the reporting in the book, because I'm super excited to read it over the weekend. Um, but when you're at that point, when you're at the point of closing up this book, where were you on the Trump timeline when you turned in the draft?
So when I wrapped the epilogue, it was in late spring of this year.
Okay.
So it was abundantly clear that, he was the nominee.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Nikki Haley was out. Everybody was starting to coalesce around him, including Ron DeSantis and
Right.
others. So, yeah, it ends there. The last chapter of the book is all about Trump's early takedown of DeSantis,
Mm-hmm.
and the epilogue goes through the primaries. It starts in Iowa.
Got it.
Which was freezing and cold, and
I was there for the primary. It
oh god,
was.
it was so
I've
cold,
never.
Rick.
I've been to some ice cold places in my day, but I've never been colder than that. I mean,
It was so crazy.
it was.
It was crazy.
I we were walking from a dinner back to the hotel, and it was like 2 blocks. I'm thinking, I am going to die. This is actually how it ends. They're going to find me in a snowbank on the side of this road.
It was so cold that you didn't even know it was cold. It was weird. It was like temperature
Right.
didn't even
Right.
it didn't even register with you. It was wild.
I
But it was also like the weirdest Iowa caucus ever.
oh yeah.
And for multiple reasons, right? And so it really ends there. But I argue that the primaries had been over for a long time, and it
You're.
was with Alvin Bragg's
Yep.
indictment that sealed the deal, that gave him the political momentum, and that the primaries had been over for a long time.
Yeah. A former DeSantis person expressed that to me, just like bitter as could be. Like we could have beaten him if Bragg hadn't indicted him. He would not have raised the $30 or $40 or whatever it was in a couple of days, and
Blockbuster money, yeah.
and we would have been, we were about to turn in a big quarterly report, and the reporters would have all been amazed, and the guy sometimes he has the sort of devil's luck sometimes that you can't buy that in politics. You really can't.
No, you can't. Although my question now, as we're sort of barreling towards
Yep.
November, is, so much of Trump's political fate so far has been for things that are basically out of his control.
Sure. Oh yeah. Yeah.
These indictments. I mean, obviously his behavior contributed to them, right? But the timing of the indictments, luck with the race, even the attempted assassination, which was horrific and everything, but
Yeah.
that gave him this boost going into the
Mm-hmm.
RNC. Now we're at a point though where we're less than 90 days to the election, and I do wonder, he has a sentencing in September, but
Right.
is he going to get struck with any sort of luck or anything out of his control from now until then? Because if not, I do think that's an X factor.
Yeah, I think he's. And look, as you mentioned, the assassination attempt by this kid. There's something about Trump, and I would love to get your thoughts on this. He's almost conditioned us as a culture and a country and our political culture that whatever the craziest thing you think is going to happen,
Right.
another one's coming at you any second now. There's no one who can like lay awake at night and go, it can't get much crazier than this, because it always seems to escalate one more notch.
Always. And, I'm just thinking to the last 4 weeks of this campaign, the assassination attempt, JD Vance at the RNC,
Mm-hmm.
just how jubilant the Republican Party was in Milwaukee and gleeful at the idea that they were going to be going up against President Biden. Just kidding. He's, the man who has built his entire career around, trying to prove people wrong finally says, okay, I'm going to step aside.
Right.
And you get, Vice President Harris. And it's just, there have been so many twists and turns just in the past month. It's hard to fathom. And it really has been shocking. But once Trump is actually gone from Republican politics, from American political life, you're so right. I wonder if the public is going to be like, where's the
stimulation?
Yes, exactly.
Well, Meredith, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. Folks, the book is Trump in Exile by Meredith McGraw. It is, I'm eagerly awaiting reading this book this weekend, because it is a slice of anthropology and reporting of Trump, and in a moment that I think reshaped our political destiny nationally, and his certainly. So, Meredith, thank you again so much. We'd love to have you again on in the future, and all the best of luck with the book. Is there somewhere people can reach you on social media?
Of course. You can find me just at Meredith McGraw on Twitter, and my Politico email address is there. And great. I look forward to hearing what people think of the book.
Well, thank you so much again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
All right, folks. I want to talk to you about JD Trans. I know you're accustomed to calling him JD Vance, but in the last few days, multiple pictures have emerged of JD Vance in drag. Now, look, I don't give a fuck if you want to wear drag. Go knock yourself out. It's not my flavor, but plenty of people do. Plenty of people look fabulous in drag. It's been a part of every human culture, by the way, before all the heavy breathing right-wingers lose their fucking minds. It's been a part of every human culture in recorded history. And I don't know what it means or why it's in our behavioral set, but I do know that guys like JD Vance are engaged constantly in a false moral panic about gay people and about trans people and about people who wear drag. And they conflate all of those groups, and they're not, and by the way, there are plenty of straight people who do drag, all this stuff, right? They conflate all of these groups with pedophilia and child abuse. And no one's excusing pedophilia or child abuse. It's obviously a moral horror of the first order. But the idea that JD Vance is out there with multiple pictures of him in law school, not like 30 years ago, but in 2012 and 13, multiple photographs have emerged now of JD wearing drag. And I don't know if it was a party. I don't know if it was a whatever. But here's the thing. If you found one picture of Tim Walz in drag, the right-wing media machine would never shut the fuck up. If you found one iota of evidence that any Democratic politician had done so, you would never get the right-wing media machine to shut the fuck up. So I've noticed in the last few hours that after the second picture emerged, the silence of the right-wing lambs. They are really, really freaked out. They are pretending this didn't happen. They're pretending they didn't see it. They're pretending it was a deep fake. They came off of a old set of photos that have been on a Facebook group of Yale Law School people, friends of JD Vance's, for 12 years, 13 years. They're real. So again, I don't give a shit about whether you wear drag or not, or if JD Vance wears drag or not. If he does, leave him the fuck alone. That's his choice. But the idea he's out there on the tip of the culture war spear telling every other person how to live their lives and judging every person who's gay or trans or wears drag and calling all of them risks and dangers to children and calling all of them universally pedophiles, it should make you really wonder about JD Vance's moral character, which is to say, none at all. And that's why, JD Vance, you're both... Oh, and one other thing. As a 60-year-old straight white guy, I don't like frequently engage in like judging the quality of drag, but I think in the era where RuPaul has led the very successful reality show, yeah, JD's drag is not that great. It's not that great. So anyway, JD, as always, you are, sir, on the enemies list.